so there's no way for us to know definitively how he was fixed to the cross.
We're not entirely sure that Jesus wasn't just tied on with ropes or some combination of ropes and nailing.
But in 1968, under the streets of Jerusalem, archaeologist Vasilios Tsafaris discovered a fascinating clue. He entered the tombs to investigate the human remains of first-century Jews buried in stone boxes called ossuaries.
I was called one day to clean up 4 tombs. Inside there were the skeletons, and in the lower chamber was an ossuary, a simple one with no decoration, with a simple inscription in Hebrew, Yohanan, John, the son of Hagagol.
But something in this box of bones wasn't a bone at all. It was a nail.
This person was actually crucified. We know of thousands of people who were crucified, and the great one, of course, Jesus. But it's the first time we have an archaeological evidence of a crucifixion.
This is what he found: the ankle bone of a man called Yohanan, who was crucified in Jesus' time. It's the only known physical remnant of a crucifixion victim.
This is the right heel bone of a man in his 20s. When they nailed the man to the tree or to the cross, what happened, you can see here, is this soft iron nail probably struck a knot in the wood. When they took him down from the cross and tried to then remove the nail, it was impossible. So this individual was buried with a nail in his foot.
Physical anthropologist Joe Zias conducted the most in-depth study of Yohanan's bones and concluded that this man couldn't have been crucified the same way as shown in paintings of Jesus. This nail went through the side of the foot, not the front. Zias also scrutinized Yohanan's arms and hands, looking for a telltale sign of a nail.
Since there was no evidence of traumatic change, it became clear to us that this individual, like many others, had been simply tied to the cross.
Zias isn't the first expert to investigate ancient crucifixion. In the 1930s, French doctor Pierre Barbet performed some macabre experiments, nailing corpses to crosses. Most artists portrayed Jesus nailed through the palms, but Barbet found this method problematic. Nails through the palms couldn't support the weight of a body. The only way to keep the corpse on the cross was to nail it through the wrists. Barbet also did a number of experiments to determine the medical cause of death for crucifixion victims. His conclusion: they died because they couldn't lift themselves up to exhale. Death by asphyxiation is now the most widely accepted explanation for Jesus' death. But one scientist has a new theory.
He didn't die of asphyxiation. The cause of death was cardiac and respiratory arrest due to hypovolemic and traumatic shock.
Dr. Frederick Zugaby, a medical examiner, has studied crucifixion for over 50 years and has built the only laboratory in the world that contains a crucifix. He believes it can show why Jesus died. The traditional crucifixion position has Jesus' hands outstretched and his feet nailed to the front of the vertical post. Dr. Zugaby asks volunteer Steve Mandrakia to simulate being fixed to the cross in this posture. Thanks to some specially designed quick-release gloves, Steve won't be in any danger.
We use these leather gauntlets. We have holes here.
The gloves connect to stress gauges that hang from nails on the cross. These help track how much pull there is on Steve's arms and shoulders. The gauges show moderate strain on each of Steve's arms. After 10 minutes, his blood oxygen holds steady at 97%.
Are you having any trouble breathing?
No.
Steve's in no danger of asphyxiating. Next, Jonathan proposes his theory of how Jesus was nailed to the cross, based on the heel bone of Yohanan.
What would happen if you didn't have this post, but there were 2 nails driven through the ankle into the beam?
There would be excruciating pain from the weight of the body on the nail.
Do you think the person would try to pull themselves up in this position?
They would attempt to, but they would get excruciating pains of the hands so that they could do very little to take the stress off of the feet. Now, the nailing of the hands and the feet are so brutal, it's one of the worst pains ever experienced by man.
According to the Gospel of Mark, death came to Jesus in just 6 hours.
It was the 3rd hour when they crucified him, and at the 9th hour Jesus cried out in a loud voice, "My God, why have you forsaken me?"
Were the nails the cause of his rapid death? Modern science may be able to shed some light. The Visible Human Project is a comprehensive computer model of the human body. Dr. Vic Spitzer can drive a virtual Roman nail into the ankle bone of a virtual foot and track the damage.
One of the major nerves is coming down the upper side of the ankle. In order to get into the bone, we have to go through the periosteum, or the outside covering of the bone. That's where the pain receptors are. The pain would be phenomenal.
Such nerve damage would lead to traumatic shock, which can be fatal on its own. And then there are the hands, if they were indeed nailed. Pierre Barbet's cadaver tests argued that nails would rip out of the palms. His traditional crucifixion position placed nearly 90 pounds of force on the arms. But Dr. Zugabe's test, with the body positioned like Yohanan, puts only 20 pounds of weight on each nail.
The hands are tough. That's why we are able to use them the way we do. Just putting a nail through between metacarpal bones, the long bones in the hand, the fibrous tissue alone ought to be able to support the weight of the arms and forearms against a wooden beam.
The medical prognosis for 4 nail wounds is dire and sure. Their combined assault on the nerves and blood vessels would shut down bodily functions. Pain would lead to traumatic shock and exhaustion. Bleeding would make blood pressure dip dangerously low. Eventually, the body would suffer cardiac arrest. As Jesus begins his final hours on the cross, a Roman fixes a sign above his head, announcing to all his crime of being called King of the Jews.
That sign indicates that the Romans were trying to make an example out of him. This is what happens to the King of the Jews. We, Rome, are in charge.
This sign could be the genesis of the Latin cross. To find a place to fix it, artists over the years extended the vertical post above the crossbeam. Over time, it grew even taller. But Jesus was probably suspended just a few feet off the ground as his loved ones witnessed his final moments of life.
A Roman crucifixion sort of hits the fine balance between maximum pain and maximum length of time that you endure that pain.
The pain is quickly coming to an end for Jesus. But it's just the beginning of his new life as Jesus the Savior.